The boy's stomach groaned so loudly it startled the crows on the roof. His mother pressed her hand against his hollow belly as though her touch could quiet the hunger, but she had nothing left to give him. Not milk, not bread, not hope. His eyes, wide and shimmering like polished glass, searched hers for an answer she could not provide. Beyond the cottage walls, the fields lay bare, the earth stripped clean by too many hands, too many mouths, and not enough rain. The famine was not just a season. It was a thief stealing not grain but dignity, tearing apart the bonds of family with its cruel insistence. Survive. No matter the cost, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The year was 1316, the second year of the Great Famine, when even the strongest oxen stumbled like drunkards, and children learned the taste of bark and boiled nettles. In a tiny village tucked into the damp folds of northern Europe, the Harlow family clung together like driftwood on a storm-tossed sea. There was Thomas, the father, whose broad back had once been the pride of the plow-field, but now curved under the weight of endless disappointment. Beside him, Margaret, his wife, thin but unyielding, her face lined with both devotion and quiet fury at a world that demanded so much yet gave so little. Their children were Robert, the eldest at 15, already tall but gaunt, and little Alice, only 7, whose laughter had once filled the yard but now lay buried beneath her silence. The church bell rang faintly from the hill, its tone not of celebration but of warning. Another funeral. Another family broken. Thomas closed his eyes at the sound, wishing he could shut out the world as easily as a candle flame. But he could not. His duty was to the living, though the living were slipping closer each day to the realm of the dead. At supper, if it could be called that, they gathered around a single wooden bowl. Inside floated a thin broth made from cabbage leaves scavenged from the manor's refuse heap, thickened with ground acorns. The children ate slowly, not because they savored it, but because they tried to stretch the moment before the hunger returned. Margaret watched them with a knife-edged ache in her chest. She had cut back her own share for days, her ribs pressing sharply beneath her dress, yet she said nothing. Robert noticed. He always noticed. "Take some, Mother," he whispered, pushing the bowl back toward her. She shook her head. "Eat! You'll need strength more than I." Thomas's eyes flickered with something between pride and sorrow. He had lived long enough to understand the arithmetic of famine. Every bite for one meant one less bite for another. It was a cruel mathematics of love and survival, and Margaret carried the heaviest sums upon herself. That night, as wind rattled through the shuttered windows, Thomas lay awake beside his wife. He whispered, "We cannot last on this. I will go to the woods tomorrow." Margaret turned to face him, fear in her eyes. "The Lord's men patrol the forests. If they catch you poaching, they will hang me," he finished for her. "But what is the difference if we starve instead?" His voice broke. "I cannot watch Alice waste away." She touched his cheek, her hand trembling. "Promise me, Thomas. Promise me you'll come back." He did not answer because he could not. The next morning, Robert insisted on going with him. The boy's eyes were fierce with a mixture of duty and desperation. "I can help," he said. "I'm strong enough." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. In truth, he needed Robert not only for his strength, but for his presence. In famine years, men disappeared into the woods and never returned, not because of beasts or soldiers, but because they could not face the shame of returning empty-handed. A son beside him was an anchor. The woods were damp, heavy with the smell of rot and moss. Branches dripped with rainwater, and underfoot the earth was slick. Robert carried a snare he had fashioned from twine, while Thomas held a bow older than himself, its string frayed but serviceable. They moved in silence, ears tuned to every crack of twig, every rush of wings. Hours passed, and their stomachs growled louder than any prey. Then Robert froze, pointing. A rabbit, small, thin, but alive. Thomas drew the bow, his hand steady despite his hunger. The arrow flew true, striking the animal through the side. Robert rushed forward, gathering it up with trembling hands. Tears shone in his eyes, though he did not know if they came from relief or guilt. "Father," he whispered, "it's enough for us. But Thomas's gaze was fixed beyond him, toward the deeper woods where deer trails cut through the brush. "It is not enough." "Not yet." By dusk they returned with only the rabbit, but even that felt like a miracle. Margaret wept when she saw it, pressing her forehead against Thomas's chest as if the creature were proof not only of survival, but of love. The children ate that night as though they had been given a feast, though the meat barely stretched between them. Margaret insisted on boiling the bones into broth for the next day, unwilling to waste a drop. For a moment, hope flickered in the Harlow home, but famine is not so easily defeated. The next week, Thomas and Robert returned from the woods with nothing. The snares were empty, the bowstrings snapped. Worse still, they encountered one of the Lord's patrols. The men, clad in rough mail, sneered as they demanded to see what Thomas carried. Finding nothing but empty hands, they accused him of theft anyway, for in those days, hunger was itself a crime. Thomas was beaten in the mud while Robert was forced to watch, helpless and shaking. When they staggered home, Margaret's eyes blazed with rage. "We pay our tithes, we give our labor, and still they bleed us dry." Her voice cracked as she wrapped cloth around Thomas's bruised ribs. "What more can they take?" "Everything," he answered bitterly. It was then that Robert, once a boy of obedience, began to change. Hunger had carved something sharp inside him, a secret determination that he would not watch his sister die. He began sneaking out at night, venturing alone to the manor kitchens, searching the refuse heaps for scraps. Once he returned with moldy bread he had stolen from the dog trough. Alice ate it as if it were cake. Margaret scolded him fiercely, but her tears betrayed her gratitude. One night, Robert overheard whispers in the village square. Some men spoke of raiding the Lord's granary. It was dangerous, suicidal even, but the thought rooted itself in his mind. He told no one, not even his father, for fear they would stop him. Meanwhile, Alice's condition worsened. She grew weaker, her legs too thin to carry her, her cheeks hollow. She spoke less and less, until her silence felt heavier than any words. Margaret spent hours by her side, singing the old lullabies, though her voice cracked on every note. Thomas began working longer hours in the fields for the manor, hoping for scraps of mercy that never came. The family, once united, now frayed under the famine's grip, and then came the betrayal. One morning, Robert was missing. His bed lay empty, his few belongings gone. At first, Margaret thought he had gone to the woods, but Thomas knew better. His son had gone to join the men who plotted to steal from the Lord's stores. Margaret fell to her knees. "He will be caught. They will kill him." Thomas said nothing, for the truth was harsher. Perhaps Robert believed his death was worth the chance to save them. Days passed without word. Then, one evening, smoke rose from the manor fields. Rumors spread. Men had broken into the granary, but the attempt had failed. Several were captured. Others fled. The Lord's men hunted them through the villages like wolves. When Thomas returned home that night, his face was pale. Robert was seen among them. Margaret pressed her fist to her mouth, muffling her cry. Alice stirred weakly in her bed, her wide eyes following the fear in the room. That night, Margaret confronted Thomas. "You must find him. You must bring him back," he shook his head. "If I go after him, I will be taken as well. He is your son," she screamed, though her voice cracked under the weight of despair. "He is our son." Thomas turned away, unable to meet her gaze. He made his choice. But in the darkness, when Margaret wept into her hands, Thomas slipped from the cottage. He could not abandon Robert, not truly. Father and son were bound by something greater than hunger, the fragile thread of love that famine could strain but not sever. The night swallowed Thomas as he walked, each step taking him farther from the fragile safety of his home and deeper into peril. He carried no torch, for fire was a beacon to hunters, and he was already hunted by the famine itself. The road to the manor stretched dark and muddy, the ruts filled with rainwater, the air sharp with the smell of smoke from the failed raid. He thought of Robert, his son, his boy, and though anger stirred in him, it was dwarfed by fear. If the soldiers had caught him, he would already be hanging from the gallows. If he had escaped, he was somewhere out in the wild, starving, alone, and branded an outlaw. Each step Thomas took pressed his bruised ribs until every breath seared. Yet he did not stop. Fatherhood had become his last anchor against despair, and if he abandoned it, he would drown. The woods closed around him like a coffin. He listened for signs, breaking twigs, hurried footsteps, whispers, but heard only the owls. Then faintly from the shadows came a cough. A boy's cough, ragged, pained. Thomas's heart leapt. "Robert?" he whispered hoarsely. A figure emerged from behind the thicket, staggering, his clothes torn, his face streaked with dirt. It was his son. Robert's eyes were wild, his hands shaking as if he had forgotten what it meant to rest. When he saw his father, he froze, not with relief but with guilt. "Father," he whispered, voice hoarse. Thomas reached for him, but Robert flinched back. "You should not have come. If they catch you, they will kill us both," Thomas finished, his voice low. "But I would not let them kill you alone." For a moment, silence stood between them, heavy as the night. Then Robert's body gave way. He fell against his father's chest, sobbing like a child, despite the man he wanted to become. Thomas held him, his rough hands cradling the boy's head, as if to shield him from every cruelty the world could hurl their way. They made their way back through the forest, slow and quiet. Robert told fragments of what had happened, how the men had stormed the granary, how the Lord's guards had been waiting, how some were cut down in the mud while others fled. He had seen neighbors, men he had admired, dragged away in chains. "It was for nothing," he whispered. "We stole nothing. We saved no one." Thomas did not answer. He knew the price of rebellion was often blood. And yet when they reached the edge of the village, relief crashed through him. Robert was alive. For now that was enough. But Margaret's face told a different story. She ran to Robert, clutching him, kissing his filthy hair. Yet her joy carried fury. "How could you leave us like that? How could you risk everything?" Robert looked at her, tears shining in his eyes. "I wanted to save Alice. I wanted to save you." Margaret's anger cracked into grief. She pulled him close, holding him so tightly it seemed she would never let go. "Foolish boy," she whispered. "Don't you see? It is your life that saves us." But Alice was slipping. The little girl had grown weaker in their absence, her breath shallow, her lips pale. When Robert knelt beside her, she managed a faint smile, whispering his name. He stroked her hair and promised her he would never leave again. She nodded as if she believed him, though her eyes spoke a deeper truth. She knew promises could not fill her stomach. That night, Thomas sat in silence while Margaret stirred the thin soup. Robert fed Alice tiny sips, his hands trembling with the care of someone who had finally understood the fragility of life. In the shadows, Thomas felt both pride and shame. He had brought his son back, but what had he brought him back to? A home where love endured, yes, but where survival was still uncertain, where every dawn was another gamble. The days blurred into one another. Hunger gnawed at them like a relentless wolf. Thomas's bruises healed slowly, Margaret grew thinner, Robert carried guilt heavier than stone, and Alice faded by degrees. Then an unexpected chance came. One morning, a messenger rode through the village, posting a notice on the church door. The manor was seeking workers to haul grain shipments south to the markets. Payment would be in bread, meager but more than most had seen in months. The villagers gathered, muttering. It was a cruel trick, many thought, to pay them in the very grain hoarded from their own fields. Yet hunger silenced outrage. Thomas knew he had to go. Margaret clutched his arm. It could be a trap. The Lord's men do not forget faces. They need hands more than punishments, Thomas replied. And if they mean to hang me, let it be after I have earned enough bread to keep Alice alive another week. Robert insisted on coming too. He would not let his father walk into danger alone. Margaret protested, but Thomas saw in his son's eyes the same determination that had driven him to rebellion. This time, though, it was tempered by understanding. He nodded. The journey to the southern markets took 3 days. They walked in a line of peasants, oxen dragging carts of sacks heavy with grain. Guards rode alongside, their eyes sharp, their hands on their swords. Hunger made men dangerous, and the Lord trusted no one. On the second night by the campfire, Robert spoke quietly to his father. "We could take some. Just a handful. They would never know." Thomas shook his head. "They would know. And they would kill us both. Survival is not only stealing bread, it is knowing when not to steal it." Robert lowered his gaze, but Thomas saw the struggle in him. Hunger still whispered its cruel bargains. When they returned, they carried with them 2 loaves of coarse bread, hard but precious. Margaret wept when she saw them. Alice's eyes lit faintly, and though she could barely chew, the taste of bread on her tongue seemed to bring her back from the edge for one more day. Yet famine lingered. The bread was gone in days. The weeks dragged on. Neighbors vanished, some to graves, others to roads, fleeing in search of kinder lands. The village itself seemed to hollow, its silence deeper than the winter snows. It was in that silence that Robert made his confession. One night, as the family huddled around the dying fire, he spoke. "When we stormed the granary, I was not only trying to feed us. I hated him, the Lord. I wanted to see him suffer." His voice cracked. "When I saw the gods fall upon the men, when I saw them cut down, I felt both fear and satisfaction. What kind of son feels that?" Thomas looked at him for a long time. Then he said softly, "The kind of son who has seen too much cruelty. Hatred is easy when the world starves you. Forgiveness, that is harder. And more necessary." Robert's eyes burned. "Could you forgive me? If Alice dies, could you?" Margaret touched his hand. "We forgive you because we love you. And we love you because you are ours. Nothing, no hunger, no mistake, can take that away." Robert broke down, his tears spilling freely. Alice, half asleep, reached out her small hand and placed it on his cheek. In her silence, forgiveness spoke more powerfully than words. Winter passed into spring, though famine still lingered. The harvest that year was thin, but it was something. Slowly, green shoots rose from the earth, and the village stirred with cautious hope. Some families had not survived, but the Harlows had. Scarred, weakened, but together. Alice never regained the full strength of her laughter, but she lived. Each day she grew a little stronger, fed by the first vegetables, the first bread of the new season. Margaret's cheeks filled out faintly, Thomas's back straightened again, and Robert carried both the guilt and the grace of what they had endured. One evening, as the family ate from a bowl of barley porridge, Thomas spoke quietly. "We survived because we chose one another again and again, even when hunger begged us to choose ourselves. That is what famine cannot take." Margaret reached across the table, taking his hand. Robert smiled faintly. Alice, licking porridge from her spoon, looked from face to face as though she understood the truth. Even at her tender age, survival was not just bread, but love. And though famine would come again in other years, though hardship would never fully leave their lives, the Harlow family had carved a truth into their bones, that sacrifice, forgiveness, and unity were the only feast that never ran dry. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.